If you're currently studying for your CompTIA Security Plus exam, this is the right video for you because I passed my exam on my first attempt. And in this video, we're going to go over 10 practice questions from Domain 1 of the official exam objectives, general security concepts. So let's get started. Question 1. An administrator wants to trap attackers using a decoy system to learn their latest tactics and techniques. Which of the following should be implemented? Honeypot, Honeynet, Honeyfile, or Honeytoken? And the correct answer is a honeypot because this describes either a system or an IP address that's designed to lure attackers in so that once they gain access to that system, we can then learn their latest tactics and techniques to discover what are they doing. Are they performing a brute force attack? What passwords are they trying in that brute force attack? And so on and so forth. A honeynet is a group of interconnected honeypots. So it's a network of fake devices that's all designed to lure attackers in so that they think, oh, well, this is not just a single honeypot, this is an entire network of legitimate devices. But of course, it's not. It's just designed to get attackers to access that network. A honey file describes a fake file that all has the same purpose in that we're trying to get the attacker to open this file one way or another. Finally, honey token is a trivial or fake piece of data, an invalid piece of data, such as an invalid username or password for a database server, that's used so that we try to get the attackers to use that set of credentials against the database server to see where they're attempting to do this from and if they're actually even trying to use these passwords to begin with. But of course, these are fake, these are invalid credentials that don't actually work. But we're looking for a system, a decoy system designed to lure attackers in, and that is a honeypot. Question 2. A website owner is using HTTPS encryption to ensure security between endpoints. Which of the following is being described? Integrity, confidentiality, availability, or steganography? And the correct answer is confidentiality, because confidentiality is the concept of ensuring that data is only viewed by people who should have authorization to view and access that data. And in this case, we're using encryption, HTTPS, so things like a public key to encrypt the data and a private key to decrypt that data. And that's why we're using confidentiality, because only the client or the web server that should have access to view this data or interact with it is actually doing that. Integrity is the concept of ensuring that data is not tampered or modified with, so things like the preservation stage in the digital forensics process of Domain 4 of the official exam objectives, or even things like file hashes that shouldn't be changed or modified at any point is associated with integrity. Availability is ensuring that there's system uptime, that your users can access data and resources when necessary. Finally, steganography is the concept of hiding or concealing data within an image file, an MP3 audio file, or even an MP4 video file, so that you can then do things like send that image or that file outside of the organization with the company unknowing to the fact that we're actually sending confidential data outside the organization because we planted that inside the file. But we're looking to ensure that people only can access data that they should be able to view and access, and that is confidentiality. Question 3. An organization desires a preventive control that would prevent attackers from manually entering the facility. Which of the following should they most likely use? Video surveillance, security guard, bollard, or sensors? And the correct answer is a security guard because this is an individual who applies things like access badges to ensure that only authorized users are gaining access to various parts of the internal organization. And that would prevent attackers from manually entering a facility. A bollard is a strong, sturdy object that is planted into the ground to ensure that cars or other large vehicles can't simply bash through and ram into the organization because this bollard would actually stop that vehicle right in its tracks. But this would be installed outside the organization and it wouldn't prevent attackers from manually entering the facility because they could simply walk right around the bollard. Video surveillance is a detective and a deterrent control. This is referring to CCTV cameras that's installed wherever in the organization, and this records and monitors activity and provides you with footage after the incident has actually occurred. Finally, sensors, they are considered detective and deterrent controls as well. They detect various activity, they detect any motion in that particular area, so that if an attacker gets in close proximity to that sensor, it could detect that. But we're looking for a security guard that would prevent the attacker from entering the organization. Question 4. An administrator is considering a technology that would only allow users to access network resources based on the credentials they provided. Which of the following would accomplish this? Masking, AAA, policy engine, or gap analysis? And the correct answer is AAA because this describes authentication, authorization, and accounting. So let's start with the first A, which is authentication. So this is when you provide your credentials, so like your username or your password, to prove that you are who you're claiming to be. And then the next phase, step 2, which is authorization, describes with the credentials you've provided the system, what access do you actually have? Can you access these resources? Can you access these files? What permissions do you have? And so on and so forth. Finally, the third A is accounting, and this describes things such as how long were you actually logged into the account for. And AAA is used in conjunction with Radius or remote authentication dial-in user service to provide network authentication and authorization. Masking is the concept of using or obscuring data using things like asterisks or fake data in the place of real legitimate data, so that if an attacker were to gain access to those systems or that database or whatever is using this masking technology, they would not be able to view or utilize any of the data because it's rendered unreadable using asterisks. The policy engine operates in the control plane of the zero trust architecture in domain 1, and this is the device that actually, or the software, whatever it might be, that actually blocks or allows access to the network resource that's being requested from the subject or the system that operates in the data plane. Finally, a gap analysis is a system that the organization will implement, and this describes taking a look at where you currently stand with your policies, with your procedures, with your employees, with your attack surface and threat scope, and everything, and analyzing that, comparing it to a desired future state, and seeing how you can close the gap to achieve that state that you desire so much. Question 5. Which of the following describes a file that contains a list of revoked certificates? CRL, honeypot, OCSP, or honeyfile? And the correct answer is a CRL or a certificate revocation list, because this is literally an external file that you'd manually download, and it contains a list of website certificates that have been revoked before their actual official expiration date. OCSP is a security technology that allows you to quickly verify the status of a certificate to see whether or not it's been revoked or if it's currently still valid. A honeypot, a fake device designed to lure attackers in so that we may gain additional insights into their latest tactics and techniques. Finally, a honey file is similar, except the same principle just applies to a file. It's a file that we're trying to get the attackers to open or access in some way, but we're looking for a manual file that contains this list of revoked website certificates, and that is a CRL. Question 6. Which of the following describes randomization that is added to a password before using a one-way mathematical function? Hashing, salting, TPM, or HSM? And the correct answer is salting, because this refers to password salting. It's when you add randomization, which is just alphanumeric characters, letters, and numbers to a password before you then hash that password. Because if you perform salting, you're adding in that much more security to your organization, as opposed to if you only hashed that password. Hashing, of course, in and of itself is the concept of using a one-way mathematical function or algorithm, such as SHA-256 or MD5. Of course, MD5 has some hash collision vulnerabilities, but I'm just giving you an example here. And what this is that you put your password through this hashing algorithm, and then it'll generate for you this very long string of text containing letters and numbers, which makes it that much more difficult for attackers to read, because if they were to gain access to, say, a database that contains hashes, password hashes, they'd first have to manually crack all of those hashes using specialized hacking tools before they could gain access to see what the password actually originally was. A TPM is a trusted platform module. This is a tiny device that's on the motherboard itself that would do things like prevent brute force attacks and do things like provide remote or hardware attestation to attest to the fact that it's not been tampered with and that it's a safe device. HSM is a hardware security module. This is an individual device that's typically very expensive. It does things like store and generate cryptographic keys. But we're talking about adding randomization to a password before you hash it, and that is salting. Question 7. The primary power experienced an outage in an organization, and a UPS device immediately came online. Which of the following control types is being described? Preventive, corrective, compensating, or deterrent? The correct answer is a compensating control because this is a control type that compensates for the lack of the primary control that is failed, so you're forced to resort to a suboptimal control because that's the next best thing that you can do. So this is a perfect example of a compensating control whereby the primary control, which is the power supply itself, failed, and then you have to resort to an uninterruptible power supply or a UPS coming online so that you can actually continue to have power and provide power to the devices in the organization. Other examples of compensating controls, and this kind of applies to the second domain of the official exam objectives, is things like if you have a 0-day vulnerability that's just been discovered, well, you can't patch your systems because patching would be considered the primary control. So the next best thing that you can do is implement things like segmentation to segment your network so that if an attacker does exploit that vulnerability in your network, well, then you are still kind of protected because not all of your devices would be affected. A deterrent control is a control type that discourages attackers from performing their malicious or nefarious actions. So examples of deterrent controls are things like sensors or even CCTV video surveillance, so CCTV cameras, because they would more likely discourage attackers from performing their actions if they realized that this technology was actually in use. A corrective control is a control type that attempts to reverse the impact of an event after it has actually occurred. So things like in the incident response phase, if you're in the eradication phase, using malware or antivirus rather to remove malware, or if you've been infected with ransomware or just malware, same thing, and you're now in the recovery phase of the incident response process from domain 4, then you can use a corrective control such as using backups to revert back to your previous state before you were infected with that malware. A preventive control is a control type that prevents the incident from occurring in the first place. So things like IPS, intrusion prevention systems, bollards, security guards, access control vestibules, firewalls, antivirus, web application firewalls. These are all examples of preventive controls because they prevent the attack or the incident or whatever it may be from actually occurring in the first place. Question 8. A user is comparing the hashes of two files to ensure that they are not identical. Which of the following are they ensuring? Integrity, confidentiality, availability, or non-repudiation? And the correct answer is integrity because this is the concept of ensuring that your files or your file hashes are not tampered or modified with in any way. So in the question, they're comparing the hashes of two files to ensure that they're not identical. This is the concept of ensuring that there is no hash collision going on, which is when you have two different files which result in a identical file hash. Confidentiality associated with things like HTTPS encryption or VPNs or virtual private networks. This describes only people who are viewing or accessing your data who should have the authorization to do that. Availability, ensuring system uptime, ensuring that you have things like load balancers from domain 3 of the exam objectives, ensuring that if there's a DDoS or a distributed denial of service attack going on, well, you can still maintain your availability and uptime for your users who are requesting access to a web server's resources. Finally, non-repudiation describes the fact that a user can't deny that they performed a specific function because we have proof that they did that. So examples of non-repudiation would be if an email came from a particular user and we have their actual official email address listed there and things like digital signatures that came from their email, this would allow us to attribute exactly where a email came from and from who. Question 9. An organization desires a preventive control which could prevent attackers from using a vehicle to ram into a building. Which of the following should they most likely use? Sensors, bollards, security guard, or fencing? The correct answer is bollards because this is a physical control, a preventive control as well as a deterrent control. But this would prevent attackers from ramming directly into the building because they'd first have to get through this bollard, and chances are they're not going to get through this bollard. It's going to stop them right in their tracks. Sensors detect motion in the area. These are considered detective and deterrent controls. A security guard is a physical control, a preventive control, a deterrent control, and a detective control, actually. But we're talking about ramming into a building. They would just ram right past or right through the security guard. And this doesn't really allow for if you're trying to block an attacker just using a vehicle to ram through it. The most associated one is going to be bollards here, especially for your Security Plus exam. If you receive a question like this, just know that whenever you see like a car or a vehicle ramming through, that's automatically bollard, it's not fencing. Question 10. A company's employees are performing routinely day-to-day activities Monday through Friday. Which of the following control types is being described? Physical, managerial, operational, or technical? The correct answer is an operational control because these describe controls that are performed routinely on a day-to-day basis through hours of the week. So this can be things like ensuring that your locks at the end of the day are indeed locked and that they've not been broken or tampered with in any way, ensuring that your accounts are audited and that there's no suspicious activity going on. This can be things like log auditing or user account auditing. And finally, let's look at the other answers. So we have managerial controls. This describes administrative controls. These are things like policies and procedures and standard operating procedures and guidelines in the organization that just describe how cybersecurity should be maintained in the organization. A physical control is one that operates in the physical environment. So things like a bollard, fencing, or an access control vestibule or a man trap, as it was previously referred to as, they all operate in the physical environment. Finally, a technical control describes any kind of control that's implemented using technology. So things like firewalls or web application firewalls, antivirus, IDS, IPS, anything that's implemented using technology is considered a technical control. So those were the 10 questions of Domain 1 of the official exam objectives. And if you're serious about passing your Security Plus exam on your first attempt, I believe that personalized guidance can make a big difference as to whether you actually pass or not, or even just how the study experience actually goes for you. Because if you really want to pass your exam on your first attempt, I can guarantee that I can help you do just that because I passed my exam on my first attempt. And if you need help with literally anything from the official exam objectives, just like we saw in this video, I know I can explain literally any topic and answer any question you have, whether it's how the exam went for me, what is the exam structure like, how much time do you have, what I wish I had done better, what I did well, what I wish I'd done before studying for the exam, and so on and so forth. So if you're serious and you want that one-to-one help, click the first link in the description, join my Telegram group, and direct message me the word mentor to get started. So if you don't want to pay the voucher fee a second time in case you fail, well, click the first link, join the group, and message me the word mentor for one-to-one help.